Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to day 2 of Rail Live in the blistering sunshine. Sadly, I can't use yesterday's gags, which I used all day about it being the solstice and 18 hours of daylight, and that the Speaker and I had just returned from Stonehenge and watching the sunrise over the Heelstone. But look, thanks ever so much for coming to listen. I see we've got the same barking police dog in the background from yesterday, but it wouldn't be the same without it. Hope you're having a good show. Just quick show of hands, whether whether you're registered guests or whether you're exhibitors. How many are exhibitors? Stick your hands up. Oh, there you go. It's a good mix then. Thanks ever so much. Right. I'm delighted to welcome my very good friend Huw Merriman, who I've known for some time now. From the days when you were just an MP, I think, Huw, or
just a mere MP.
Just a mere MP. Yeah. Before you were a member of the Select Committee for a good while, or were you not?
I was, from pretty much the time I came in Parliament in 2015.
And then went on to chair it.
I did.
How long did you do
Did
that
I last?
for?
I did it just after the 2019 elections, so just before COVID. It was an extraordinary time. So almost 3 years.
And that's always an interesting experience. In fact, we have your successor as chair.
I know, he's done an upgrade. Ian Stewart, who does a great job.
Ian Stewart is sitting quietly amongst you, hoping that you're not going to notice him.
He gave me a grilling yesterday, actually.
Did he?
Because I was before the Select Committee.
I haven't had a chance to look at that yet. Yeah. So if you want to ask the chair of the Transport Select Committee a question in private after, I'm sure Ian would be delighted to be put on the spot in a sunny corner sometime. He may especially appreciate a coffee or an ice cream, but he's nodding and he's got his thumb up, so there you go. But thanks ever so much for coming. It's amazing how that back wall fills up once we start speaking. We're just going to have a chat, Huw.
Good.
I think.
Happy with that?
So let's start with it. What do you think the first question is going to be? Let's see.
Funny enough, that was Ian's question. He was brilliant. When Ian took over from me, and I think it was pretty early on, I came before the Select Committee. His question was, if you were still sitting here, what would your first question to yourself be? Which was absolutely fantastic. So that obviously wasn't your first question. So I don't know, probably be, how's it going? Or something gentle and soft like that before you really rip into me.
Let's talk about GBR, shall we?
I thought that might be... my attempts to sort of like move that on didn't work.
No, it didn't. And we'll talk about the HS2 story in this morning's Sky News later. We'll give you an opportunity to say what I think you will say, but we won't preempt that.
Yeah.
Look, serious stuff, we're stuck, aren't we? We're not going to see GBR in the legislation.
So I think the key part for this, and I remember going back to Select Committee days when our number 2 at the time in the Department for Transport, we asked the question, what do you actually, what can you set up with Great British Railways without legislation? And the answer is pretty much all of it. The bit that is sort of stuck and does require some legal change through legislation is the change of the contracting powers for train operations, which sort of by law sits with the Secretary of State. So that bit would have to be moved over. But again, you can actually see, when I used to be before I became an MP, I was a lawyer and I was a transaction lawyer, so we used to structure sort of solutions. And so I'm always a big believer in if actually one part doesn't necessarily work, you actually look for another that does. So to a certain degree, there's no reason why you can't actually have a lot of the decision-making in terms of contracts, which is put at Great British Railways, but then, of course, you still have to have the legal sort of provisions, the workaround still within the department. I recognise it makes it a little more complex, but that's my whole point. I'm a big believer in cracking on with things and getting things done, rather than just saying, oh, we can't do this now because we haven't got one avenue. You go for another. But when it comes to the rest of the setup of Great British Railways, the staff, the people, which ultimately, as you all know, it's people that make things happen. It's not pieces of paper and legislation. That bit can be put through, and the other powers can be transferred away from the Department for Transport and into Great British Railways, the devolved railway, where we integrate track and train and really allow the railway to actually run itself rather than Whitehall, which is something I'm really committed and keen to do, as is the department as well. There's far too much we do inside the department which we shouldn't be doing. We didn't do it pre-COVID, and the railways worked very, very well then. So in my view, we shouldn't be doing it now. So I'm committed, Nigel, and to the point of, well, what are you doing then? Every single week, we have a meeting with the team to work out how, when we can shift matters over. And we work very closely with Andrew Haynes, Peter Hendy, and the GBR TT team and we're looking to put more over. And a lot of the things we're doing is actually badged through Great British Railways as well, so they are doing it. So some of the freight work that's going to come out this year will be from them. And again, if you didn't think we were going to do this, we wouldn't be publishing the response to the consultation, which is what we're doing this summer. So this will happen, Nigel, and still remain in the view that when we have the time to legislate, we will legislate. But when we have other time, then, which is right now, then we'll set up GBR.
Okay. I can't tell you how much I'm going to enjoy saying this bit. Mr. Stewart there in the House of Commons last week quoted my last editorial, saying that you and the DfT should look at the suggestion I'd made in an editorial about setting up GBR in shadow form, like the SRA was set up in 2000, to just get on with the sort of stuff you're talking about. So why not do that? I mean, you've effectively said that's what you're kind of doing, but it would give some real shape to it if you said, look, there is GBR, it's in shadow form, it's being led by Andrew Haynes, and as far as passenger service contracts are concerned, they can do everything bar sign it, and that's all that the Secretary of State's required to do. I realise that's an oversimplification.
Yeah, no, I know, that's fair enough. And actually, in a way, that's exactly how I'd actually put it as well, almost as an oversimplification, because you need to start with that and then actually work out why people will tell you, actually, no, you need to do, it needs to be a bit more than that. So you can see from a legal perspective, you'd need to make sure there was a proper legally accounting mechanism and process around the Secretary of State when it comes to making those decisions. Otherwise, decisions end up in court because have they been properly made? So you would, of course, need something that's there. But you start with that simple design idea that you've just mentioned, and then you actually start to deliver it, or you actually find reasons why it's not quite as straightforward as that. And to your point, actually, I think, Ian, you raised that with me, didn't you? And I actually said very nice things about you, Nigel, in terms of your ideas. But actually, and it wasn't that we'd already sort of pinched them. Those were the discussions I'd already actually had with the team internally, and Andrew and Peter, because the way I described it is you need a team that are looking at transitioning matters over, but you also need the team that are in place actually looking to take it, because they've got the urgency and they've got the drive. And so we are looking at exactly what you just described. As I said to Ian, I don't know whether we call it in shadow form, but in terms of the people actually then saying, right, I'm ready to do this, and putting those people into post. That's exactly what we're working internally with colleagues from other departments in Whitehall to do just that.
So why aren't we doing it then?
Look, things do take time through government. We have to get sign-off from other parts of governance as well. It's a fair point to say that when we actually focus on one way of doing things, and so the legislation is the classic thing. And as I said, right from the start of me being appointed, I realised this was going to be such a huge change management programme that we would need weekly project meetings, which I would chair, and we have done that. But it does take time to actually then get things signed off and then through. But I just want to sort of leave you feeling assured that we are going to set this thing up. We've got our headquarters in Derby. We now need to fill it with people and work, and we will do that.
Okay. You said that everybody's agreed that the DfT has got its hands far too deeply involved in the railway on an everyday basis, running it. In 2019, I think it was, the permanent secretary sat where you are, and she's still in post there. She told me that when she was DG, she couldn't believe how she spent several weeks working on the design of coffee cup holders for new trains. And she's been absolutely adamant that the DfT needs to step back. So we keep hearing it, but we never seem to see it. Do you think, because people don't cede power easily, do they? So whatever you said at the top level, have you got the permafrost in the middle of the DfT thinking, like hell, they've got decades of experience of protecting their territories and deflecting change, haven't they?
Yeah, so I think when I was doing Ian's role, I think I had sort of queried whether people have got their train set, do they actually want to let go of it
exactly
post-COVID? But I genuinely tell you, Nigel, that is not the case at all. The people inside the department that run it on the civil service side also recognise that they are not best placed to do that. And actually, if you come to it, much as I'm not knocking the job, I don't think the permanent secretary does want to be designing coffee cup holders as well. So therefore, we're incentivised to move matters over where the real experts are, where they understand the industry, work with the industry, bring it together. And we believe that is much better done outside of Whitehall. So we're all joined up on that. So I can genuinely tell you, from having sat at the chair of the select committee, wondering, now being in the department, knowing that the culture really is there and the determination to actually move matters out. And look, we also need to, because if you look at things pre-pandemic, I mean, thanks to you all for everything that you have done and you also did during the pandemic, but we were able to double passenger numbers, double investment, and put an extra third on in terms of services. Those are the types of sort of cultures that we need now more than ever, because we have lost a lot of patronage. So I'm not saying we're returning back to the model of franchising, but I want to return back to the model where private industry commerce is actually really running the railway, taking the risk, getting the rewards, growing the railway, and I believe that GBR is better bringing all of that together.
I agree. We just want to see it.
Well, on weekly basis, Nigel, we are at it, and we work very closely with the team at the Treasury, Number 10. We are committed to rail reform in our manifesto, and my job is to deliver it, and I am, and I will.
That's clear enough, and you all heard it here first. Let's look at one of the specifics. It was, when did the Secretary of State do the Bradshaw? Was it February 7th?
Ed Leach will know, who's here. He
well, I was
helped
just going to mention Ed because...
Put him on the spot there. So, back in February.
Sat next to Ian Stewart is the Secretary of State SPAD, Mr Ed Leach, former railwayman. Ed, you sat in the room with the Secretary of State and me before that lecture, and he was absolutely clear, and clearer than he was in public, I suppose, which is going to be in a private conversation, about the absolute folly of separating revenues and costs. He was totally clear about it. I won't use the language he used, but it was very clear. He made the same comment at the speech. He also, that famous comment, which actually cropped up in that meeting, wasn't it? It was time for managing directors to be allowed to both manage and direct. That speech received a lot of acclaim, including from me, but we've seen virtually no progress on the revenues and cost things at all. I talked to TOC MDs, and they said there's no change, even in the conversation or anything. There's no way the Treasury are going to agree to that.
So, again, that's another example of GBRTT where you don't need legislation to actually have one P&L. But what we do have is the reality of the situation. I used to work in the Treasury, so I get it completely, which is lots of departments will say to the Treasury, you should allow us to spend more because we'll give you a return. Now, the Treasury have to make sure that that return is absolutely going to be delivered.
It is a return.
And so, and that's understandable because lots of departments say that, and actually they're not able to back it up. And one of our 5 priorities that I'm always reminded of is to reduce debt. So we're not supposed to be spending the money on that basis. We have to spend it where we know we've got the business case that's really been sort of assessed that will deliver increased revenues. So a good example of that where we did this with the Treasury was in extending the Stansted Express timetable. So we were able to demonstrate the case there. But it means we have to demonstrate it for every single part. And that would be the same if all the P&L was with the Department for Transport or all the P&L was with the Treasury. The bottom line for us right now, because of the situation we're all in, and you all know it, you all have household bills, you'll see your tax statement as well. You know how difficult it is to make ends meet right now, that we can only spend the money when we know that it's going to give us a return. And so that's the exercise we have to go through with the Treasury. And I had a conversation, a really good one, with the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, saying we need to be doing more of this. We've done it with Stansted Express. We've got some other ideas. Let's do more of it, and let's give you, the Treasury, more of a return. But ultimately, Nigel, as I say, what I want to see are new contracts where the private sector is putting the service on. The private sector is taking that risk, using its balance sheet, and then gaining a reward which it can actually share with us. That's where I want our contracts to be. Well,
let me give you a very specific example from a TOC MD who told me, he said, I have got a plan and a scheme which would raise us £3 million in revenue. He said, but it would cost £1 million to do it. He said, and as soon as I said that, the DfT said, no way. Now, the Secretary of State thought that was madness, in his own words. He said that doesn't make any sense at all. But that thinking is still there. Nobody sees any sign of it disappearing. So and that's the return you talked about.
But that's right. But that's where someone... Look, it's fine. I could sell you a dream right now in terms of I could set up a business venture. You're going to get all this money through. Rightly, it has to be absolutely assessed, as it definitely will, or as sort of near as darn sure, deliver that return. And so, of course, they need to be assured that's the case. Otherwise, what's happened is we've just lost £1 million of taxpayers' money because nothing got returned back in. And look, from a political perspective, I'm all about fiscal responsibility like that. So I do want to get the return. But again, that's why I'd rather the train operators actually had the freedom in their contracts to take more risk where they can see that reward. And then your example of your TOC MD, rather than handing all the money back to the Treasury, he can also make some for his shareholders. And that's where I'm interested, and we're doing a project right now, not just in terms of setting up these brand new contracts for the future, but can we amend the existing train operator contracts in order to allow them to have that incentivisation in the existing contracts right now. So I've set the challenge to the train operators. Actually, it was the evening of the Bradshaw speech, because the Secretary of State and I were talking to a number of them. We said, right, you give us a version of your contract amended where you can do all the things you say you want to do. We can do it now. So, they're part of the exercise as well.
By the way, I promise not to quote you on that. I could sell you a dream.
I
could sell you a dream right now.
I think when you say promise not to quote me, I think I probably already have been quoted. So, but it's obviously I'd have to register everything in my members' interest. You'll find very little in there, Nigel, because I've focused on the job. We have actually got their ideas through. We just need to make sure that actually we again don't end up with the risk and the private sector end up with the reward. We have to be very, very sensible about this. So, I'm looking forward to seeing those contracts amended.
So when do you think we'll actually see some difference then?
Well, look, firstly, I would say that, we're seeing differences already in the way that we're trying to push more things out. So I was up at King's Cross recently on the single leg pricing announcement. We've got demand response testing going on as well. And we're certainly seeing difference in terms of building new railway, which we are doing as well. So I suppose the question is, when will we actually start to see the train operators feel as if they've actually got this power and ability to do this? And that's when we've gone all the way through the contracts. We are in the sort of negotiation stage of them now. So my hope is that as we go through towards, sometime during this year, that we'll end up in a place where we've got those contracts and they can start taking that risk themselves.
Like me, you will have seen Twitter every weekend with pictures of rammed trains, crammed to the gunnels. As you leave this site, just have a look at the hundreds of passenger vehicles which are sat round doing nothing, including the brand new Arterio fleet behind us. There's the 769 hybrid fleet, which is, I think, about £50 million of the public money, all sat doing nothing. I mean, it does not make sense, does it? But again, it comes down to cost. The department doesn't want to see that cost. The Great Western 769s are sat here because it was the easiest way for Mark Hopwood to meet his demand for a 10% cut in his...
Look, that is the challenge we've got right now. So if you look at recent Office of Rail and Road figures in terms of how's the railway doing, it will show we're back at 88% of patronage compared to COVID. But actually, if you strip out the Elizabeth line, which is a railway, not an underground, then that takes you down to 73%. So that's the patronage. So, of course, we don't have as much need on that basis as we did. But the bit, again, coming back to the finances of this, and you run companies, you understand the bottom line, is that the financing is only at 70% of where it was. And actually, annual season tickets, I've still got mine. Only 30% of commuters have got annual season tickets compared to pre-COVID. And that was the financial reward that all the train operators wanted, those annual season tickets. They're gone and they don't look like they're going to come back. So we do have to cut our cloth accordingly.
But I did say at weekends, leisure travel's 118% of pre-COVID. And that's a discretionary market.
Yeah.
And that market will not continue to choose the appalling services that are being offered whilst hundreds of carriages sit here doing nothing.
So I was very straight with this when Ian and team were asking me questions. The performance is not at the level as where we would actually like it, but there have been some examples where performance has changed. I'll give you an example. South Eastern's performance is the best it's been in 6 years. And what's brilliant there is whenever I meet their managing director for South Eastern, I also meet the managing director, Ellie Burrows of Network Rail. They work so closely together, those two, as a real team. And again, it comes back to integration and what we want to see with Great British Railways. But what's also interesting for them is that they've really noticed the difference in terms of the repairs, renewals, where things go wrong, because we've got reforms in maintenance now. And so that's starting to deliver as well. So South Eastern's sort of cancellation rate was, I think, sort of up there about 13%. It's now 1.1%. It's absolutely superb. Those are the things you can do to make a difference. And I want to see that across our network. The Trans-Pennine Express or trains, still not good enough. We want that to improve. Avanti, I have to say, has really pulled out the stops. So their cancellation rate was, again, about 13% back in January. In terms of their own sort of induced cancellations, about 1.5% now. And their reliability in terms of performance, punctuality, is up at 93%, and it was in the early 70%, so a few months ago. So, credit where it's due for those people who work so hard. I'm not just talking about the management, I'm talking about everyone that works as a team to get performance up. And I'm all about making those feel better. And also, I know we focus on the bits that don't work, and understandably, but for the bulk of the time, it does work for passengers. They do get to where they want to go to. They do get a comfortable journey. They do get the opportunity to work. They're not stuck in a traffic jam where they can't work or sort of enjoy the beautiful railway and the scenery around it. So we should talk up the positives, and as well as recognising the challenges and trying to fix them.
I agree totally.
I'm not saying you don't do that,
no,
because your photos on Twitter are always of fantastic, beautiful old locos and the like as well. So those are the ones I tend to look at.
Distraction you. But you're right about talking up the railway. When are we going to hear the Prime Minister do that?
Well,
that was an interesting pause.
No, I was thinking of an example where he sort of talked down the railway.
Well, he hasn't talked anything about the railway. I mean, does he go anywhere other than by helicopter?
So, well, look, can I say, I will never be Prime Minister, obviously. And so all I would say is that if you are, then you are tight for time. So I think, his ability to get... No, come on, look, he's a friend of mine. I love Rishi Sunak to bits. It was one of the best moments for me when he became Prime Minister, because I used to share a corridor with him. I'll tell you one thing.
You can
Nigel.
get, if you know him that way, you can get him on a train. Get him on a train.
Let me tell you this anecdote. So all this stuff about sort of Rishi and the rest of it, when I shared a corridor with Rishi, I had no idea about what his background was, because he was the most humble guy, and also he shared one very small office with 4 members of his staff, because he always wanted his team to work closely together. He could have had extra office space, but he wanted to work like that. He commands great loyalty for people that have actually known him for some time, work for him, and I'm absolutely in that camp. So I wouldn't serve under Boris Johnson. He was not my thing. But with Rishi, I always believed that he would end up being a brilliant leader, because he knows how to work darn hard every day.
It was a slightly mischievous question.
So no, it was, but it gave me an opportunity to be... I mean, you might think I'm being a creep. For me, I genuinely mean it. He's a great guy. And I tell you what, anyone that is the Prime Minister should run their office like a chief executive would run a big company, and that's exactly what he does.
Just take him on a train somewhere then, will you?
Okay, I will pass that message on.
To his
I'll tell you, we'll get him on that
golf
golf
buggy.
buggy.
Sending the Secretary of State out with
Well,
him.
Ed actually has been on visits with the Prime Minister whilst he was Chancellor at Leeds Station when that investment went in place to deliver the extra platform. So that was an example where he would have been there.
Okay, right. I've taken half the time. Let's give you a lot of turn. Who wants to ask the Rail Minister a question? Will you look at that? 2 hands, 3 hands. Who's got the microphone? Where's the lady with the mic? Here she is. Oh, she's going there first. Okay. And then we'll come over here to you two. If you could say who you are and what your affiliation is, please.
Hello.
Before you start, please try and make it a short question. Don't do that business of making a speech and saying, don't you agree, like Huw and his colleagues do in Parliament, thereby turning a speech into a question. Nice short question, please.
No problem. So I'm Rob Scargill. I work at the National Railway Museum. My question is, where will GBR be in 18 months when the general election is? Either if we have a Labour government or a Tory government, at what state will it be left?
Well, I can't obviously speak for the very hypothetical Labour government part, because ultimately it's down to them what they want to. I mean, their policy is to nationalise, so I would have thought they'd actually want to keep more things within the department. But you'll have to ask Louise Hagan Tan what they would look to do. Where I want to see it set up is in a place where we've got the people in post. They're actually doing their day-to-day. They've settled in. They are delivering an integrated railway. We've got our regional directors that are in place who are managing a network rail chief for that region, as well as a train operator chief. And they are actually delivering. So that's how I see it. And the Derby office is, you walk into it and it feels like a sort of good functioning office. And then also, interestingly, then I look at my own submissions and workload, and that has actually reduced. Not because I'm lazy, Nigel, but because that would actually be a sign that we are actually putting more out into the railway. So that's how I see it. And again, we focus on Derby because that's where the HQ is, rightly so. But remember, this is a regional entity that we're looking to set up, so we'd have to have the regions all focused and running as well.
Okay, thanks. Two over here. David and the gentleman next to him, who I don't know.
Ken Foster, Head of Infrastructure at East West Rail.
Ken.
Thanks for coming to see us, Minister. It's good to have that visibility and contact. Decarbonisation. How's it going and where we're going? Because there's still a lot of trains out there that Isambard, Kingdom, Brunel would not be unfamiliar with.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So the big challenge, and East West Rail, of course, is an example, and it came up in the Select Committee in terms of, well, hang on, you're building a new railway, why is it not all going to be electrified?
Why is it going to be diesel, I think?
Well, so the challenge with that railway, as you would know well, and I know it from having grown up nearby it, because I was brought up a few miles away from Winslow, is that is an existing railway in the most part, or a previous railway. So the assets, the infrastructure, the bridges are all of that part where you can't actually electrify because you have to take out. And actually that makes it a much more expensive proposition. But what you are doing, Ken, as you will be able to tell everyone here, is it is actually being built with future electrification in mind. And of course, we've got the new railway part as well. But where I'm really interested, and I love working with the team at Porterbrook, Helen and team, who I've known for some years through the Select Committee work, is where the future is, that you don't necessarily need the overheads. You've actually got the situation with sort of biomodes, hybrids, the Hydroflex train that Helen works so hard on. And actually that means that largely you can keep the existing infrastructure. You don't have the expensive spend for overheads and electrification. And that's where I think our future needs to be. It is tricky. I mean, our rolling stock, the average age of it all is 17 years because we've invested in so much. And so, of course, an awful lot of it is diesel, which is where I'm really interested in the technology of actually being able to retrofit what's existing and actually then take the sort of decarbonise that way rather than the actual mass infrastructure, which, of course, itself, when you deliver it, actually it comes with a carbon footprint as well. So innovation, technology, it'll be interesting to see where we are in 10 years' time on that front.
Two quick reactions to that. You know as well as I do, Huw, that it's always more expensive to retrofit anything once you've built it. And that will be much more expensive than electrifying it now. And I am surprised too you say that, because hydrogen and batteries are only ever going to be useful for secondary railways or branch lines. Electrification is always going to be the cheapest to build, cheapest to run for big mass. Am I wrong in that, David? That no? It's got to be the core.
So look, I agree, and I won't. Look, I mean, Ian will know the Select Committee's body of work in the past included an excellent report called Trains Fit for the Future, and we were, I think both you and I were members of the committee then, weren't we, Ian? And you know, we talked about electrification, but it was a real challenge because electrification in this country was costing £2.5 million per mile, and the Germans were able to do it for £500,000. Now that Select Committee report said the more that you actually do rolling programmes of electrification, then the cheaper it gets, which logically makes sense. But again, when you're looking at how much you can actually stretch building of railway, and you know, we're competing with schools, hospitals, other builds, we need to be able to demonstrate that we can actually deliver it to a cost as well. So it's balancing the decarbonisation bit with actually getting the best possible cost. Because if we don't get the best possible cost argument out there, we don't get the sign-off to be able to deliver the railway in the first place. So I'm afraid it's the old trade-offs thing. Okay. It's not perfect, I recognise, but it's the trade-offs part. But there is a lot more electrification that is coming down the track as well. Some great work's being done in Wigan at the moment. And of course, we've got Midland Main Line 3 with pipeline as well.
Okay. We've got 5 minutes left, so as David had his hand up, I'll take one more.
I'll give very short answers.
Who are we going to go for? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. So that gentleman there. So, David, if you could ask your question, then we'll have that one straight away, and we can deal with them both at the same time.
Okay, thank you, Minister. David Clark from the Railway Industry Association. I'll not go back into electrification. We'll park that for a moment. As I think you probably know, we set out some tests for what success would look like for GBR, and top of them was no hiatus for the supply chain. So there's some good news. We're seeing the numbers around CP7 being similar to CP6. That's good news. But in terms of other things, electrification or decarbonisation is one. Another is rolling stock. We haven't seen a mainline order for 1,200 days. And another is enhancements, and we haven't seen an RNEP for over 3 years. So my question is, what can you do to help give the supply chain confidence beyond the maintenance and renewals?
Because that will give you the value you need.
Yeah, so look, what I do with the enhancement, there's quite a lot in there, just for ease of time. So we have talked about the enhancements portfolio. There was when it first came out, there was a commitment to get it out every single year. It only actually had one update. So this is probably
3 years ago.
Yeah, but as I say, it's not as if you'd had like 20 years of RNEPs and then it was sort of stated, right, let's get this out, let's get it every year, had one update, and then I recognise it's been late. The important part is we're still spending the money on the enhancements. We spend £2 billion a year, that's our budget for it. We talked about East-West Rail, that route got this announcement. It's one of those rare examples in politics where the shovel is going in the ground before the fanfare and the publication. So we are working on this over the summer to look at what we can do. But the important part is we're actually getting on and delivering the railways. You go up to Newcastle, Northumberland line being built. So for sure, yes, it will end up in a document. Yes, you will end up seeing it. Yes, someone will stand up proudly announcing it. But actually what's important is that your members, your supply chain, are actually building it right now and getting paid for it, and that's what is happening.
But they do need the certainty to plan and
But
invest.
we'd also like to be able to sort of like list all of that out as well. But I think the most important thing is that don't think that we sit in the department saying, actually, we're not going to sign off for that contract getting moved because we haven't got the trumpet out yet. We actually sign off on the contract, and it's actually then getting built.
OK, thanks, Hugh. Gentleman at the back there. Nice and sharp and...
Richard Hill, Network Rail. You've talked about decombination, that's been done, we've covered that. What's being done to drive more people in modal shift from road to rail? And you said Rishi likes working close with his team, maybe a few shots on a train round a table might go well. What's being done to shift that away from road?
Yeah, so that's a fair part. I mean, we still have there's a lot of it is actually marketing and nudge. So, you know, if you go down to Vauxhall, where lots of people are driving their cars and they're stuck in traffic jams, there'll be a great, the Green Network Rail sign will actually tell you what you can do in terms of moving out of your car and the amount of carbon you'll save for the environment as well. So a lot of it is actually that nudge marketing part. And again, I think our view is we need rail to compete with car, also to compete with aviation. So I'm not into sort of like interventions that actually sort of force people out by taxing. I'd actually rather sell the benefits of rail as a sort of greener, cleaner, more enjoyable way to travel, and you compete that particular way, and that's what we always talk to.
OK. Look, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm really sorry. Peter Hendy's on in a few minutes here. I'd like to
I'm his warm-up man.
I'd like to thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Cheers.
Thank you. And just one parting comment from me. I hope you don't think I've overstepped the bounds of our friendship this morning by giving you a bit of a hard time here and there.
No, never.
Because I tweeted it at the time that I thought that your appointment as Rail Minister and Ian's as TSC Chairman at the same time were two of the best appointments I'd seen in a long time. And it's
Thank you. Everyone has been so nice.
It's good to have two friends of the railway in that.
Yeah, that's very nice of you. Thanks, Nigel. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Cheers.